So, what should Christians know about the Israeli-Palestinian crisis? What are our blind spots? And most importantly, how would Jesus want us to respond? Brian Newman founded the Isaac Ishmael Initiative in 2011, and he's traveled extensively across Israel and the Arab world. Brian was born and raised Jewish here in the US, and after becoming a Christian, he worked as a journalist and later as a pastor. Terry and I befriended him in the Netherlands, where he pastored our church. And I served with Brian on the board of an international Christian relief and development agency. Brian is currently a pastor at Living Word Community Church in York, Pennsylvania. A bridge builder and peacemaker, Brian co-hosted a prayer meeting with a Muslim imam and a Jewish rabbi on the day after the October 7th Hamas attacks. And we're here with him to explore the crisis in the region since the Hamas attacks on October 7th and the huge Israeli military response that ensued.
So I would say this: it is not a new conflict. It's an older conflict, and people would ask the question quickly, well, where should we start to think about this conflict? Some people would say, well, you have to go back 3,000 years to when God made a promise to Abraham about the land. Well, I would argue that that's really not the best place to start. First of all, most people in the world don't start there. There's a very small number of Christians who might start there. I would argue that you do have to start about the middle of the 19th century. I think it's fair to look at the current conflict, at least in the context of the last 150 years. Why is that? Well, in the mid-19th century, there was this huge movement especially in Europe, of sort of nationalism, where the Prussians and the Russians and the Austrian Hungarians and lo and behold, the Jews said to themselves, hey, we want to be our own people, our own land, our own place. And so the Austro-Hungarian Empire was started in 1865, and German nationalism grew and Russian nationalism grew. And there was this guy by the name of Theodor Herzl, who was born in the 1860s, who by the 1880s, when he was a young man, had this idea of a Jewish state. And I think that it's important that we all kind of grasp that for the Jewish people, the idea of a state, of a place, first of all, it was not a religious conversation. Theodor Herzl was an atheist. He couldn't care less about what the Old Testament said about Israel. He was just a nationalist. He was somebody who said the Jewish people need their own land. And partially that was because the Jews were being persecuted in places like Germany and Russia. So in the 19th century, Jews started looking for a land, and they looked several places. They looked in Uganda, they looked in Argentina, and they looked in Palestine. Palestine was partially because it was biblical history, quote unquote, but also because the Palestinians who lived in the land, who were ruled under the Ottoman Empire, were pretty receptive to people coming into the land. So one of the things I always say to people in this is, we all have to dispel misunderstandings or untruths on all sides of the conflict. So here's one untruth. There were people in the land in the 19th century. In the land of Palestine, there were people there. There is one narrative that would tell you that there were no people, but there were. And you can look at the Ottoman Empire records, and there were census done. There were Palestinians, mostly were Arab, but there were already Jews in the land. And then many more Jews came late in the 19th century, early 20th century, and they bought land from Palestinians. So here's another thing that is just, we need to be clear on. The Jewish people who came to the land early on did not take land from the Palestinians, like they didn't steal land from the Palestinians. There was deeds that were transferred and money that was paid. Okay, it's just that simple. Especially before 1920, before the end of World War One. And so Herzl had this idea that Herzl died in I can't remember the year, but the first Zionist Congress was in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland, and that was really the first time that in public European Jews said, we want a land of our own and we want it to be in Palestine. That was really the first time. And there wasn't a lot of pushback about it. The Ottomans ruled kind of as benign dictators, and the Palestinians were primarily Bedouins, and it wasn't that much of a conflict. And especially because there wasn't a very clear sense that we want a political state there. They just wanted their own, they wanted land, but they didn't have to be a country. So fast forward 1917, there's a guy by the name of Arthur Balfour in the UK. He comes out with a declaration saying that the Jewish people should have a national state in the land of Palestine. The first time anybody in the West had made that commitment, and it was a very big deal. He was a lord in the parliament. To this day, Palestinians will talk with anybody about how horrible the Balfour Declaration was. Really, after 1917, the tension really, really rose over people coming to the land. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Jewish people came in much larger numbers because of Hitler and Mussolini. So Hitler is elected chancellor in 1932, and Jews really try to get out of Europe in pretty large numbers. By the way, the United States does not allow Jews to come to America in the 1930s. There's a law that's passed in 1938. So if you want to point fingers at anybody, you might as well point them at the Americans on this one. And then we all know what happens at the Holocaust. And then from 1945 on till especially 1953, the number of Jews who come to the land, I mean, dwarfs anything. I mean, by hundreds and hundreds of thousands. 1948, Israel becomes a state. From 1917 to 1947 is something called the British Mandate after World War I, when basically France and Britain split up. Transjordan, Lebanon, Syria become a state, Iraq becomes a state. And during the British Mandate of Palestine, there is just growing tension between the Palestinians and the Jews. There's lots and lots of reasons why that is. There were some Jews that came to the land and wanted the Arabs out, wanted the Palestinians out, for sure. There were many other Jews who came to the land and really wanted to live with the Palestinians. They pushed very hard. Even David Ben-Gurion pushed for this. And that's why today there are 2 million Arabs who are Israeli citizens. But it was very, very mixed as to what the Jewish people wanted with the Palestinians, and vice versa, by the way. I think that's the fairest assessment that we can make of the Jewish and Palestinian relationship before the independence in 1948. So I give you a little bit of that framework because I actually think it's very important to go back and understand where we came from in this. the Ottoman Empire ends in around 1920, and kind of the Middle East gets blown up at that point. You know, the Ottomans had ruled for 400 years. World War I ends. Turkey's on the wrong side of the fight. And the French and the British carve up the Middle East, including Palestine. And to be really honest, they do a mess of a job. It's just terrible imperialism at its worst. So some of what we're dealing with 100 years later is a response, a reaction to what happened after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. Actually, you know, Miriam's from a Kurdish background, and the Kurds are offered or told that they're going to have their own country after World War I, and then the Turks pull that away 3 years later in 1923. So it was a terrible mess then, and there are consequences for it today. So I always tell people, I think that people need to understand and work at understanding the nature of the conflict back 150 years, not just in the last 5 or 6 years. So does that all make sense? At least as a beginning? Okay. So let me jump on a couple of questions. I'm going to avoid a couple of these questions, by the way. I'm just like, I'm not going near that one. There's a big question about why Christians have this need to support Israel no matter what, and sort of Israel can do no wrong. So all of you on this call, or most of you, Tim, you might not know this. So I come from a Jewish background. That's how I grew up. I always say my family's like walking into a Seinfeld episode, which is funny if you're not part of the family, but a little bit crazy if you are. So I grew up with the worldview of the same thing, like Christians grow up often. You have to support Israel no matter what. Now, for a lot of people, myself included, if you were to ask me when I was a teenager or a young adult, why do you support Israel? My answer would be, because that's just what you're supposed to do. I didn't know why. They're the good guys. I didn't have an answer. Now, Christians have an answer, and the answer is driven out of a few biblical texts. So I'll give you one of them. Genesis 12 says, God says to Abram, go to the land that I will show you. I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. There's the biggie. So Christians have this sense that, well, we have to support Israel because if we don't, we're going to be cursed by God. I mean, that's kind of the essence of it. Even if Christians can't say that, like articulate that, that's what's behind it. I would just say in general, I think that's a very shallow understanding of Genesis chapter 12. Because it sounds like God is saying there is an unconditional blessing on Israel. And the Old Testament does not say that. I think it's a very hard place to be theologically. So I would add to it right away that Israel also had other commandments. Israel was supposed to be a type of people that, yes, they were promised the land, they were promised a land. What came with that was they were to welcome the stranger and the foreigner. They were to be hospitable. They were to protect themselves against enemies from outside. But overwhelmingly, the Old Testament call was to be a hospitable people and to be at least tolerating of foreigners, if not welcoming of them. I think it could be argued either way. there is really a big question that I think Christians in America especially don't answer very well, is if the Old Testament people of God were not obedient to God's call of who they were to be, what did God say to them about their destiny? Well, the answer is that God said that he would remove them, he would set them apart, he would punish them. Now, not forever, but there would be consequences to them not being hospitable to people. So the question's a good question. Why do Christians and why do Americans support Israel no matter what? I think part of the answer is they don't know why, and part of it is there is a reading of some biblical text that would say that. My work with the Isaac Ishmael Initiative is to try to help people not think too highly of Jews and not think too lowly of Muslims. So what I always say to people is, look, as soon as we put any people group or ethnic group on a pedestal, like they can do no wrong, we're in trouble and they're in trouble. So it's a very difficult conversation in America right now because Israel was attacked in October. And so there's this sense in which, oh, we have to protect ourselves. But I don't think that there is very good reason for Americans or Christians to back Israel no matter what. Now, I would just add an asterisk for those of you who are familiar with sort of American theological trends. So there is this movement in America. It's called dispensationalism, where the people of God for eternity are Israel, the nation of Israel, and the Old Testament nation of Israel and today's nation of Israel are one and the same. Okay, so the nation of Israel that was started 2,500 years ago is the same people that today in political realm that were in Old Testament times. I would personally disagree with that. So if somebody's listening to this and they have this dispensational view, and you can look up what dispensationalism is, I won't get into it here. We're going to just agree to disagree on that, which I know is challenging for some people. So, okay, let me. There was one other related to it. I have no idea about what U.S. congressmen or legislators learn or are indoctrinated about what they have to believe about Israel or whatever. I would say it's pretty interesting that there was a resolution on the floor of the House this week that condemned anti-Semitism, and 71 Democrats and 20 Republicans voted against it, which is pretty fascinating. And by the way, they voted against it for very different reasons. But I have no idea what congressmen, what they believe or what they read, or there was a question here about that. And then let me answer another big one, or let's talk about it. And I know that Miriam will have a perspective on this too, but so the question was this, why do we support Israel no matter what, even when Israel is committing genocide? So I don't use the word genocide very often about a lot of contexts. So there are historically some genocide. So let's just recount them for a minute. The Armenian genocide, 1915 and 1917, 1.5 million to 2 million Armenians are killed. We all know about the Holocaust, 6 million Jews, another 4.5 million other people, very systematic elimination of a people. Cambodia, 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge, very systematic, 1.5 to 2 million people exterminated. Rwanda, 1990s, between the Hutsi and the Hutus and the Tutsis. Here's one. Russia, 1930 to 1953, Stalin. If you want to read a fascinating book, unless you're depressed, and don't read it, it's called Stalin's Genocides, by the guy by the name of Naimark, Naimark. He's out of Princeton. He did a it's about a 10-year-old book now about how Stalin systematically sought to kill people, including, by the way, the Ukrainians, which has something to do with today. So these are genocides, and what genocides are marked by is, number one, there is a systematic approach. Okay, number two, there is a stated or unstated goal of destroying a people, of eliminating a people. So Ilan Pappé, the Palestinian activist writer, wrote a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. He would argue that there was a genocide in 1947, 48, 49 of Palestinians, because when Israel was born, there was a systematic desire or approach by the new Israeli government to eliminate the Arabs from the land. That would be his argument. I don't think there's a genocide happening right now. I think there is mass slaughter, though. I don't think that most people in Israel or in the Israeli government want the elimination of the Palestinians, with the exception of 2 or 3 right-wing politicians in Israel today who have stated that they want the Arabs eliminated from the land. Ben Gvir is one of them, and Smotrich is the other, both of whom are in the cabinet of the Israeli government today. But I don't think that Israel is systematically seeking to eliminate the Palestinian people. If Ashraf were on the call, he would disagree with me right now. So, but regardless of whether this is genocide or not, whether it fits the terminology or not, I think we have to decide, and I think we have to struggle with the central question that I always ask: is the value of one human life greater than another? Now, I think we ask that question whether we're Christians or Jews or Muslims. And for many of us, myself included, I think that a lot of us have some internal prejudices that we believe certain human life is more important than other human life, or more valuable than other human life. And now let me just very distinctly put my hat on as a Christian. I don't think the Christian gospel ever allows us to have that worldview, ever. I just don't. I think, and for those of us Christians, and I can't speak as just a Jew right now, I have to speak as a Christian, because I think the Jewish worldview is complicated around this. But from a Christian worldview, every person is made in the image of God, regardless of what their religious background is or what family they're brought up in. Nowhere in the Bible are we told that one people group is fundamentally better than another. As a matter of fact, those of us who know the Old Testament, God pretty regularly complains about the Jewish people as stiff-necked, stubborn people. And having grown up in that culture, I can attest to all of that. That's exactly us. So, God says to Israel, I didn't select you because you're any better than anybody else. I selected you because I'm gracious and my ways are my ways. So our struggle right now is how do we value the life of one human being over another human being? And why would we do that? And I think that for whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or whatever, um, there's no support for that sort of theologically or biblically or ideologically. My friend Carl Medeiros lived in the Middle East for many years, and some years ago he wrote a book. It was called Tea with Hezbollah. And when he lived in Lebanon, Carl became friends with some Hezbollah fighters and wrote a book eventually called Tea with Hezbollah. And the point of the book was that as ideologically in disagreement as I am with these people, number one, we've become friends. Number two, who am I to condemn them as human beings because of their ideology? Now, did he agree with their ideology? No, he didn't, and I think all of us would say that there are ideologies that we would so oppose. You know, Miriam, you've seen firsthand, and I've seen as well, the effect of ISIS in that part of the world. That's just horrible. I mean, it's horrible. So, I think that, but the challenge of it in North America is that, or in the church, somehow we have valued the life of an Israeli Jew much, much more than we have of a Palestinian. And that is endemic in Western culture. And it was very much the case in my life too, because I didn't know Arabs and I certainly didn't know Palestinians for many, many years. But I think the challenge is for people in the West to actually get to know people who are Palestinian or Arab and fully hear their story. So I work with somebody in the Ishamael Initiative who's a Palestinian Christian named Elias, and who grew up in Bethlehem, and that was my first sort of encounter and learning about Palestinian culture. And Palestinian Christian culture is different than Palestinian Muslim culture. And growing up in Bethlehem is different than growing up in Jenin or Ramallah, for example, or for that matter, in Gaza City, which is, again, extremely different. So I think this central piece about America supporting Israel and why it has, there's, by the way, we can have a whole political conversation about it. I know there's political questions that come up about America providing hundreds of millions of dollars a year in military assistance to Israel, and I would rather kind of stay on the religious ideological side rather than the military side. But okay, let me stop there, and if there's some comments, questions, things that people have asked that you want to throw out there. I'm on a Zoom call with a reporter who has no questions. This is the first.
No, I'm deferring to others. I have many questions, but I'm deferring to others. Looks like Timo has his hand raised.
Yeah, Timo.
You had mentioned the maybe some of the mixed goals of Israel, even some people in the government having the extreme goal of just removing or wiping out the people there. But I guess, could you tell me or summarize between the government or governments in between Israel and Palestine, what are the goals? I guess what the end goal, the end hopes is, as far as what we've seen for the governments in Palestine and Israel.
Well, I would answer this before January of 2023. I would answer this differently for Israel than I would now. For the first time since Israel became a nation in 1948, it has people inside the government in the coalition who expressly state that they want the removal of the Palestinians from Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And they define the land of Israel pretty broadly, from the Jordan up to Mount Hermon, all the way to the Egyptian border, including Sinai. So it's difficult to kind of give one summary statement about Israel now, about what they want with the Palestinians. Look, there, before October 7th, for 40 weeks in a row, there were protests in the streets of Tel Aviv at the end of Shabbat over this whole judicial system, and they wanted to change the power of the courts and all this. I think there's a lot of young Israelis who just want to live at peace with the Palestinians. They want to coexist. And I think that's still the case. But right now, the Israeli government is really led by a pretty strong right-wing faction that has an inordinate amount of power. So on the Palestinian side, you know, we tend, in the West, we tend to laugh a little bit at the character of Yasser Arafat. He was kind of a goofy guy in some ways, but he actually knew how to lead. And he really, after Arafat's death in 2004, it was the middle of the Second Intifada, the Palestinians just haven't had good leadership to really negotiate with Israel. Hamas took over power in 2006 in Gaza. They were duly elected by the Palestinians, even though only 38% of the people voted for them. And Hamas is not a good actor. They're a bad actor. And when you try to put Hamas and right-wing Israelis to try to negotiate with each other, they both want the destruction of the other. So you have to get different negotiating partners. And I think that for the Palestinians, there are three groups of people. And actually, by the way, you see these three groups of people actually on U.S. campuses, university campuses. I was actually at a wedding in New York City a couple weeks ago, and I was at Columbia University. Then these demonstrations had started, and I saw and I spoke with these three groups of people. Here are the three groups. One group is, we want the Palestinian people to have their own land, to coexist with Israel. They believe in a two-state solution, and can we please figure out how to live together? By the way, I don't know what percentage of people are like that, but that's what they want. They want the occupation, that they see Israel, the Israeli military occupying the land, their land, and can we figure out to go back to the 1967 borders, and can these two peoples live together on this one land? That's one group. There's another group of people, especially like at Columbia and on university campuses, they just want to protest. You know, they're the folks that felt like there's an injustice happening and we're going to protest. We don't know a lot about Palestine, but we're going to protest, because that's partially kind of what you do in university, especially more liberal universities. And it's what fueled some of the Black Lives Matter stuff. And by the way, I don't see these people as evil or anything. They see that there is an injustice happening and they want justice to happen. Okay. And then there's a third group of people, and I was surprised by it, quite honestly, who are pro-Hamas. I saw signs of being pro-Hamas, and I saw pretty anti-Semitic signs as well, which is kind of funny at Columbia University because there's a lot of Jewish students at Columbia University. I mean, if you're going to be anti-Semitic, go somewhere where there's not a lot of Jews at least. I mean, good grief, go to Iowa or something. But anyway, so there were these three groups of people. I think that the third group has gotten conflated by US media sources, that there are all these, pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic folks. Well, there are some, but there are others in those other two groups as well. And I think that you have that amongst the Palestinians as well. Look, I have sat with Palestinians who are some of the greatest, most wonderful people in the world. And all they want, and they like Jewish people, and they like that Israel is there because Israel provides some level of stability in the region and stuff. They just want to live side by side. Many, many, many Palestinians are like this in the land, especially in the West Bank. I haven't been in Gaza. Most of us just can't be there. But I've also been with a few Palestinians who, if they knew that I was Jewish, which they didn't, they would probably be pretty disdainful toward me and probably harmful toward me. That's just the reality of it. So, Timo, I'm not answering your question easily because it's not easily answered. That what is the desire of each group is very mixed up right now, much more than it was 8 months ago. I think that the diminishing hope for these two people being in the one land is really tragic. And our view, my view, and my organization's view is that, look, there are two peoples, there is one land, they both have a legitimate right to the land for different reasons. And can we please figure out how the heck these two people can live together? There's enough land, there's even enough water, by the way, even though it's used as a weapon. And I don't think that the answer is going to be either that one of these people gets thrown out of the land or the other. I think it will be tragic if that happens. And by the way, if one of these people, if the Israelis or the Palestinians are removed from the land, whoever is left in the land will just be a pariah on the world stage. No one will relate to them. If the Palestinians actually, with Iranian funding, actually got rid of the Israelis, there isn't anybody who would relate to that country, except maybe North Korea or something. And the other is also true, that if the Israeli right actually pushes the Arabs out, they're going to be pariahs. And this, by the way, is the argument of Thomas Friedman from the New York Times. And Friedman knows what he's talking about. I don't always agree with Friedman, but he is a veteran of the region. And that's his argument, that the most integrity and the way that Israel and Palestine can be recognized in the world community is that they figure out how to live together. That's how the world will recognize them and do business with them and build their economy.
So, Brian, not to play devil's advocate, but
please do.
I want to pick on one of your comments about genocide. And I realize that the ICC right now is also agreeing with you that it's not genocide yet. In each of these wars or combats or crises that we now call genocide, they occurred over a span of years. Do we, as humans on the planet, wait for that in order to call people accountable for mass murders? Or can we say mass murder is serious enough that we call them into court?
Oh, I think that Israel should be held accountable like any other country. It usually takes time for there to be accountability. If you look at the United States military in Vietnam and some things that happened, it took years for that to happen. No, I think that the investigations and what's happening now and the pressure that's being put on Israel is completely legitimate and should continue. So, I have repeatedly contacted my congressmen and senators to say, we need to do everything we can in our power to thwart or help thwart Israel being indiscriminate in this war. No, we don't wait. But I don't think that I don't think it's we say something about what they're doing only if it's genocide. I mean, if they're prosecuting the war in a way that is not by the standards of the International Code of Warfare, then we should call them on it. But the fact that somebody doesn't prosecute a war based on the International Code of Warfare does not mean it's genocide. So here's an example. I don't think that what Mr. Putin is doing in Ukraine is genocide. I think it's horrible, and I think he's not following the rules of warfare, because he's dropped bombs on hospitals as the Israelis have. But I don't think that defines it as genocide, though. But I do think that there should be accountability for sure.
Brian, I wanted to hop in with a question. This is a little ticklish one, but I'm just wondering, clearly Israel has responded disproportionately to what has happened on October 7th. I mean, we see this. It's horrible. It's over the top, and it's deeply disturbing to anyone with a conscience. It's deeply disturbing to me. But I wonder, one of the things I'm wondering about as we navigate this resurgence of protests on a scale we haven't seen in the United States since the 1960s, and the ferocity of them, it seems to me that there is some latent anti-Semitism there, and it's something I just wonder how we navigate that as people who love God and are trying to love our fellow man. For example, there are other refugee crises. There are, the Rohingyas. There's injustice and deep conflict in Darfur. There, even on the southern border with Mexico, there's like lots of injustice and wrongdoing. But we don't, people are turning out for this with really harsh anger, and it's given what we know that the Jewish people have endured over centuries, and the different pogroms and the Holocaust and stuff, I just wonder, I'm not articulating this very well, but I just wonder if there's a danger there of, are we overlooking something that's there, or am I just reading too much into this, that so many people are willing to protest at this scale? Is there something a little more subconscious going on that we might be well to tune into?
Yeah, I'm conflicted about this because, look, we Jewish people have been persecuted a lot over the centuries, for sure. But here's my critique of the Jewish people. We tend to kind of wallow in our persecution. It's like it's our identity. It's almost like a rite of passage. And it sort of ends up getting to a dead-end conversation all the time. Well, it's sort of like the bully on the playground who's always beating somebody up, you know. Oh, you're always picking on that kid. Oh, stop picking on that kid. Oh, stop picking on that kid. And then that becomes the identity of the kid. He's the kid who gets picked on. And I'm not trying to, I know that if a non-Jewish person says this, all fingers get pointed at him. Oh, look how anti-Semitic you are and stuff. I can't be anti-Semitic because I'm a Jew, so I have an out. I think that there's part of it, what I say to Jewish people is, we kind of have to grow up. And sure, is there anti-Semitism? You bet there is. I grew up with it. I was called all sorts of names, sure. Is there a whole bunch of Islamophobia in this country? Oh yeah, there is a huge amount of it. So is it okay to be Islamic phobic but not anti-Semitic? I don't know why. So I would say, yes, it's bad, but please don't put anti-Semitism in a category where other types of prejudices and persecution are not. I think that just plays into a psychology amongst Jews of woe is us, everybody's out to get us. And that doesn't serve Jewish people well when we live in that way. So has there always been anti-Semitism? Sure, there has been. Is it worse today? Well, I think the Anti-Defamation League would, they count the number of incidents and all this, and it's skyrocketed in the last several years. I don't think that has to do with Palestinians. I think it has to do with American culture in the last 6 to 10 years that has caused some of that. More than the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't talk about anti-Semitism unless I'm asked about it, because in a Christian context, what ends up happening is you say, oh yeah, the Jews are persecuted, there's anti-Semitism, and then there's a very quick jump to, well, we have to support Israel no matter what. There's this move from, yes, anti-Semitism is on the rise, so we have to support Israel no matter what. Well, not if they're slaughtering people left and right. No. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Also, I just wondered if I don't want to overstep Terry, but I think since we're so privileged to have Miriam on the call, if we could perhaps, if she's willing, hear from her a little bit about the Muslim perspective of all this, and what we should know and what should be on our radar as human beings, as we consider what's going on.
Miriam, you want to say something?
Yeah, of course, but I'm wondering if there's any specific question I can answer.
Miriam, let me ask you a question, because we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
So as a Kurdish person, can you relate to both Israelis and Palestinians because of like this desire, like the Kurdish people and the Palestinians and the Jews have all been minorities, and they all have searched for a land to belong.
Yeah.
I mean, the Jews have gotten it, the Palestinians and Kurds have not. So how do you, when you see this conflict, how do you process what's happening, like with your own background?
So with my own background, I came from both Kurdish and Arabic background. I came from an Arabic mother and a Kurdish father. So before October 7 and before everything happening now, I can say that the Kurdish community was split into two main population. One of them supporting Palestine, and they believe they are related to Palestine because they are occupied. Like we have a country that is occupied by Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, and many other regions. Okay, but also we have other part of Kurdish people that think we should be pro-Israeli because Israel is trying to have a country there, and we are trying to have a country too. So we can be related to Israel in that context. So it's kind of, like the community have been split into two different populations. But nowadays, with everything happening now in Palestine and with the beginning of the conflict from October 7, I believe that most of people here, they stand with like humanity mainly. And it stand with what is right and stand against what's wrong. And we see that like no one here support what Hamas did. Okay, so we have to clear that. No one here support what Hamas did. No one support like war or hurting other people. But we also believe that Israel have like went so far in this, and they are just overdoing what they are doing. For example, we woke up today to the news seeing that Israeli forces targeted the refugees camp, the Palestinian refugees camp. And that's just too much to accept from like someone to do or a country to do. And also, like Mr. Rand knows how our region is not being stable lately with everything happening between Israel and Palestine, and how Iran became part of it. Like this conflict affects the whole Middle East. It's not only related to Palestine alone, and also affects the whole world. We see that how people around the world, unfortunately, like becoming like into two sections. And the truth is, like, we should not support war. That's the idea. Like whenever I speak with Mr. Ran, or I speak with many of the translators that Mr. Ran knows, he has been working with us for 2 years now. We say, when we say that Israel must stop, we don't mean that we are supporting Hamas or we want Israelis to be hurted or to be removed from that land. No, but this is gonna have consequences. And we are seeing like the world is splitting into two. Like some people support Hamas now, not Palestinians, and I think that's the fear we have. Like we don't want people to support group that make terror or hurt other people. That's the idea.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've heard from Kurdish people since October. I've been in Kurdistan several times. Is the Kurds have been persecuted themselves for many years. So when they see what's happening to Palestinians right now, there's a reference back to things like chemical weapons being used against the Kurdish people, or things like that. And so there's this sort of solidarity, and this, which I really respect, of this is unjust. So how do we work toward justice for a people? And that's what I've always appreciated about our friends in Kurdistan, because as a people without a country, without a recognized country at least, it's much closer to their hearts because of the Palestinians being controlled by and occupied by an external force, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Terry.
Brian, somebody asked, and tell me if this is the question you didn't want to approach, but somebody had asked, why is it that the other Arab countries aren't allowing the Palestinians in?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, yeah, and this, I really wish Ashraf were on the call right now. Ashraf would give a much more thorough answer. So generally, in the last 100 years, only the Jordanians have been really almost welcoming of Palestinians. King Hussein was a real humanitarian, and after 1967, allowed many Palestinians who were already living in the country to become Jordanian citizens. The Lebanese have no affinity to allow the Palestinians any rights at all. So the refugee camps in Lebanon have been just terrible places. And because Hezbollah has been involved in Lebanon, Lebanon's much more complicated. So, you know, the Egyptians are going to answer the question about, why they don't allow Palestinians in differently than the Saudis will. I think there's a couple of factors going on. One is, generally speaking, the Sunni countries, so not the Shiites, but the Sunni countries, they want to relate to Israel because of economic reasons. Like, it's stupid for a country not to have relationship with Israel in the region. Israel's economy is strong. It provides jobs. All this. That's what the Saudis want. That's what the Gulf states want. That's what the Egyptians have wanted. So there's just the pragmatics of it's good for our country to relate to Israel. And if we cozy up too much to the Palestinians, it's going to hurt in relating to Israel. That's just it. Then the other part of it, and I think, Miriam referenced it, when Arafat was alive and leading, especially later in life, the Arab countries were able to relate to the Palestinians better because he led, like he did. And he decided that he didn't want to support terrorism, especially later in life. He was never a big fan of the intifadas. And so the Arab countries, if they're left with, okay, in order to relate to the Palestinians, we have to either relate to the Palestinian Authority, which hasn't had an election in a gazillion years, or to Hamas. And the Arab countries don't want to relate to them. And you would think, oh, well, they're all Arabs. Wouldn't they support each other? Well, not so much. There's a lot of deep animosities between Arab cultures. So it is a bit of a mystery. I wish there were other countries than Jordan who would be supportive of the Palestinians. And look, I can't say enough positive about King Abdullah and how he's navigated this. I mean, of all the leaders in the Middle East, I think he's just about the only one with an ounce of integrity. And by the way, I know several people in the U.S. military intelligence community who are in contact with a lot of the leaders in the region. Every single week, King Abdullah calls Benjamin Netanyahu and talks to him every week. Now, Abdullah's been very, very clear about how he has disagreed with Netanyahu and what they've done in Gaza. But Abdullah has this understanding that it's better to talk to your enemy than to not talk to your enemy. If you want to get any resolution, you have to figure out how to have a conversation, even though you fundamentally disagree. And he does it, which is quite amazing. So I don't have the perfect answer for that. I know that General Sisi in Egypt has said he does not want 2 million Palestinians in the Sinai Desert that he's going to have to look after for the next 10 years. So that's why he's not letting them out. Why he's not letting more aid in, I don't know the answer to that.
All right, we have reached the 1 hour mark. Unless somebody has a burning question for Brian, I should
Well,
ask
let me answer one
Brian
of
to
Betsy's
make a
questions.
conclusion.
Let me answer one of Betsy's questions,
All
because
right, okay.
if I don't, Betsy's gonna email me like tomorrow, and this is a mutual friend of ours. So, um, so I know what's behind this question. She asked the question, how do you define anti-Semitism? You know, most people define anti-Semitism, if you open up a dictionary, it's hatred toward and violence toward Jewish people. But Ashraf would tell you that Arabs are Semites also. So if you're anti-Semitic, you're anti-Arab as much as anti-Jewish. But anyway, in contemporary terms, it's only Jewish people, but that's actually not right. So she asked the question, and this is a good question: how can we be a reliable ally to Israel, even though we may disagree about how they have prosecuted the war against? Well, yeah, and I don't know. I think that what I want to say to Christians is this: don't put Jewish people on a pedestal. Look, I mean, don't be anti-Semitic, sure, but the Jewish people need to be held to account just like anybody else, and the state of Israel needs to be held to account just like any other state. So when Saudi Arabia, when the crown prince, you know, he probably had this journalist killed. I mean, he was held to account for it. We didn't make him a pariah. We didn't push him out, but there were consequences to it. So there has to be consequences to Israel. And look, as much as I don't like the idea of the US meddling in other countries' politics, I think that the Israeli government needs to have a change of leadership. I hope that the Israeli people have another election very soon. I hope that the Alliance for Jewish, whatever, that Ben Gvir leads, I hope it loses. I hope he's thrown out of government. I hope that Mr. Smotrich is thrown out of government. I would love to see some kind of center left or center right government emerge in Israel so that there can be a viable partner in the Middle East for the Israelis. I hope that the Palestinians can have an election that they would elect people who were, for lack of a better term, honorable people who want to make a deal. So how do we support that? I think that, look, I communicate to my congressman pretty regularly that we don't let Israel off the hook. Like if their military does things that prosecutes the war in an unfair way, that we state that, and we do it over and over and over again. I realize that there's all sorts of complexities in this country about doing that. That you know, you get labeled in certain ways of not being pro this or whatever. We just can't give Israel a blank check to do whatever it wants to do. There's no way. We don't do that with any other country, and we shouldn't do it here. And to Miriam's point, you know, I think that Americans don't understand how destabilizing this conflict is for the entire region. You know, even North Africa in a lot of ways with refugee crisis and stuff. But you know, it's not just about the Israelis and Palestinians. It's really about the entire region. And we didn't even get to talk about Iran and how Iran meddles and stuff. But you know, a lot of that has to do with with this conflict, but a lot more.
Anybody else with anything pressing? Yeah, we can't thank you enough. Jet lag and all, just coming back from northern Iraq and being willing to help us to understand this. I know now I understand it better, and I thank you for going back over the more recent history. That really was enlightening, going back to the 19th century and on, and to try to understand that this isn't so much a religious conflict as it is, you know, a political and, yeah, empire kind of conflict.
And Terry, I'll send you a 2-page PDF file that I give to people when I do seminars, and it kind of outlines that history, just in kind of a graph form. It's just a whole lot easier for people, but I'll send it to you on an email on a PDF, and then you can send it to whoever you want. I also have a little blurb in there about the media sources you should look at. And I have to admit that I edited it right before I got on because I know I was going to send it to you. Because one of the sources I said, you know, read Reuters, but I put Reuters or the Associated Press.
That's right. You need to know where your news.
Yes, you need to know your audience.
Right. Thanks for that, Brian. Brian, we really appreciate you doing this for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Everybody.
Mary and Bethany, thank you for being on.
Yes.
Timo, nice to meet you.
It would be fun to meet both Miriam and Beth another time.
Yeah.
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 That's so great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.